Republican candidate Joseph Lhota.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
So among the things that, as funding for arts education in the schools, while the number of arts teachers has plateaued and has not been severely reduced the last few years, all the other metrics don't look so good. I am struck, as I've become an instant expert in arts education in New York City, by the by the fact of this supplemental arts funding that has seemed like a good thing introduced in your in the Giuliani administration. The Bloomberg administration has decided, no, this $60-odd million doesn't need to be spent on arts. It's the principal's discretion. Should there be some should that be reverted to the way it was set up by the Giuliani administration?
It should get even better because I think, in my view, arts education is critical to, I'm going to use the word core curriculum, but in a lowercase c in both cases. I do believe that arts, just to be careful for those,
educational bureaucracy jokes going on here. Yes,
Thank you. Art and music education is critical to the formulation of young minds. And it shouldn't be a supplemental the way it was in the Giuliani administration. It should be part of the core. And I really believe that. I do believe that, it's not just reading, writing, and arithmetic, but the ability, music itself. I actually believe I know numbers and math because of music. And they're intertwined. And there's art takes different forms, but I think it's really important to have a well-rounded person. It's mind, body, and soul is what we need to teach overall, and arts can have an impact on all three.
So it seems to be you're saying we should have, as a fraction of the $20 billion we spend in the schools, a larger fraction than we currently spend, 1.5%, devoted to arts by law?
No, by not necessarily by law, but at the request of the mayor and his chancellor.
And so if
requiring it to happen. But it should become part of, what's important to understand, I believe, about arts education is how critical it is. It's a way in which you can understand history. It's a way in which you can understand, as I mentioned, math. It has connections to some other core programs, and you need to intertwine it. It's what I remember, and there are parts of it that I've never forgotten, and it's really important.
But I'm really curious, and why I'm repeating the question is because you want to go beyond the supplemental arts funding to say there's a fixed number. Do you have that in mind? If it's 300 million, 300
I don't have the number. It'd be inappropriate.
A bigger number.
But it'd be a bigger number, and it shouldn't be. When you make it supplemental, you also make it the first thing to cut. I think when you cut arts education, you make a mistake. When you cut physical education, you make a mistake. You need to find a way to continue what I consider part of the core education program. And if you believe it's part of a core program, it does not get cut. You've got to find other ways to deal with whatever cuts are necessary. But don't take away things that I believe are essential to an education.
As a child, as a school kid, was there a moment, an experience, an aha moment where some art class, music class, or other cultural experience sort of turned you on as you hadn't been turned on?
I think when I met Kathy McGuigan, finger painting in kindergarten was probably the absolute correct answer to that specific question.
You didn't tweet her.
No, I did not tweet her. No, I didn't.
And today, as an arts consumer, I will try not to use verbs like turn on or excite, but what are you most passionate about as a consumer of arts in New York City?
Classical music. I love classical music. I always have. And I work for a guy who loved opera, and it pained me to listen to it. But I love the music more than I did the words, more than anything else. So I'm a big believer in, I love classical music. It's what both gets me charged up as well as calms me down.
And the fact that more than half of the schools in New York, this fact amazes me, do not have a full-time music teacher. Is that unacceptable?
Yes, it's absolutely unacceptable. Now, when you say half the number of schools, can you break that down for me between grammar schools and high schools.
I could, but in the simplified way that I've rendered this question on my things, I can't. No, I cannot. But it is well, for instance, only about half hold concerts and recitals, and more than 20%. Again, I lumped them all together: elementary, middle, and high school.
Sure.
Should every school in a Lhota administration, would every school have a full-time arts teacher or a full-time music teacher?
We've taken our high schools and we've broken them up into multiple schools. In some locations, they're co-located. These are public schools that are co-located. There may be a school for arts and a school for science combined with the school for automobile mechanics. And so within that confine of that building, there should be an arts teacher that could be able to share in those programs. If by chance you have someone who has decided to go away from the academic approach and go into automobile mechanics in high school, but has a desire or has the ability to take a course that's not part of their curriculum in some essentials or elemental parts of music, they should be allowed to do that.
The support for the arts from the city, arts and cultural institutions, the nonprofits, has been in decline ever since Ed Koch left office, and he was in office during a period of serious economic crisis, but he still found the money. When you were deputy what were you? Deputy Mayor for Operations.
Well, I was budget director before that, so I might have.
So you were in a lot of conversations over where money should be allocated. Was this a topic of discussion? I mean, we're talking about a pie in the sky idea of 1% of the city's overall budget going to arts institutions, despite the fact that they play such a major role in the city's economy.
As Kurt had mentioned, in the Giuliani administration, right from the first year, the mayor coordinated with Schuyler Chapin, who's the late Schuyler Chapin, who was the commissioner at the Department of Cultural Affairs, to make sure that the schools started building their cultural programs up. Now, I don't know the specific numbers. I know them in the last like 5 or 6 years where they went down and now they're on the way up.
I'm talking about the rest of the cultural programs, like you like the Metropolitan Opera. Well, you don't like the Metropolitan Opera, but you like symphony.
Well, no, I like to go.
But you know, there are big orchestras, there are small orchestras in the city, there are small museums and big museums, there are big theater companies and small theater companies, all dependent on, there are artists who are dependent on the city for keeping themselves alive. And the city has not been very helpful. I mean, you were involved with one of the more famous incidents, the memorable incidents involving City Hall and the arts.
Sure.
But
ask a question.
well, I'm sure you were waiting for it anyway.
No,
the
I
Brooklyn
get it.
Museum.
Right.
You were really the what word do I want to use? But you were the point man on the attacks on the Brooklyn Museum.
Right.
Despite the fact that so many of the things that were said were inaccurate at the time.
Well, let me go through the facts as I know them, but let me give you the conclusion. I think I've learned a lot, and I made a mistake, but the following is absolutely true. The court has held that once the City of New York gives money in an unrestricted way, it can no longer go back and give restrictions. That's at the core of Judge Schindler's ruling at the federal level. I felt, others felt at the time, that city money should not be used, that the Brooklyn Museum should use some of its other monies, for which it had many, and lots of other monies, to fund the program that actually had a painting of the Virgin Mary that included elephant dung thrown on it.
Not thrown, but it was.
Well, no, Chris O'Feely, the artist, basically, as he described it, basically would throw it, and it wasn't placed in a specific place as you were about to describe. That being said, what I said both in court, I said prior to, and I said in court, the role of the city is to allow an art museum to show whatever it wants. The role of the city is to be able to provide access and egress for anyone who wants to see it, and for those who want to protest it, push them off to the side and make sure that there's a place for them to do it. But at the time, I had thought, and I was held wrong, and now I know the difference, that you shouldn't be using taxpayer dollars to desecrate one's religion.
Well, so many museums are on city property.
Right.
The Brooklyn Museum, Metropolitan Museum, the Museum of Natural History, PS1. Should the city be playing a role?
No,
in...
no, and they shouldn't, and that had no bearing whatsoever on the Brooklyn Museum case as well.
So are
The
you
city
willing
of
to
New
give
York owns
1% to the arts?
Well, 1% to the arts would be $700 million.
1% of the city's budget would be
1% would be $700 million. It's currently $156 million. It would be a nice goal, but almost impossible to implement. The city budget is $70 billion. 1% of that would be $700 million.
But let's not set the perfect against the bad. Between 150
Right.
and 700.
It could be more.
What's the
It
good
could be
number?
more. If we could afford it, we should set it as a target. What we should do is be able to break out that number.
Well, I pointed out earlier that we seem to be able to afford incentives and tax breaks to many corporations that threaten to leave the city. The arts institutions find it hard to survive here. Why are we willing to let them go when we're not willing to let AIG go?
I think the incentive programs that have been put together for corporations, while I understand why, they've been structured in a flawed way. When a company says they're threatening to leave, and they guarantee that they're going to create X number of new jobs, there is no clawback provision in those contracts to say if you do not achieve those numbers, whatever the incentive is will be paid back immediately or over time. All contracts should have some level of clawback provision in there, because the city gives away tax dollars. It should be, those are people's dollars, those are the taxpayers' dollars. They should be as vigilant with those monies as they possibly can be, and they haven't been. I've said this publicly in various different forums. We've had numerous forums over the last couple of months, that incentive programs need to be constructed just the way a corporate contract is, and it should be a two-way street. You do what you're supposed to do. If you don't, we take it back. That being said, we should find the money for our cultural institutions. We have seen, look at it in a much larger way, the way I look at the culturals. They're critical to the lifeblood of New York, and they're critical to creating jobs. It's critical to allowing people to expand their focus on everything. It creates construction jobs, because all of these museums redo, and they're generally all union jobs. Stagehands are involved in it as well. We need to look at it also from the point of view of why people come to visit New York. We're now up to 53 million visitors a year. You generally talk to most of them. They want to see the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And then while they're there, they'll want to go off, and they may want to go off and see PS1 in Queens. And actually, I believe most tourists look at our cultural institutions more than our locals. Not that it's a cultural, but most New Yorkers never go to the Statue of Liberty. It's only toured out to
They helped
much
create
farther.
that neighborhood, and now
That's right. Just like they did in Soho, and just like they did in Tribeca.
We've run out of time, but thank you so much, Joe.
I'm so sorry. Thank you. Thanks, Leonard. Nice to meet you in person. Thank you.